had worked as a domestic helper for wealthy families for over 20 years, but nothing had prepared her for what she discovered on her first day at the Harrison mansion. The massive estate sat on 15 acres of perfectly manicured lawns in the most exclusive neighborhood of Beverly Hills, with gates that required special codes and security guards who checked every visitor twice. Richard Harrison was one of the richest men in America, having built a technology empire worth over $8 billion. His company created software that millions of people used every day, and his name appeared regularly in business magazines as one of the most successful entrepreneurs of his generation. But behind the golden gates of his mansion, Richard Harrison was fighting a battle that all his money couldn't win. Arrived at exactly 7 in the morning, as instructed, the head housekeeper, Mrs., met her at the service entrance and began explaining her duties. The Harrison household employed 12 full-time staff members, including gardeners, security personnel, a chef, and several housekeepers. His job was to help maintain the family's private living quarters on the second floor of the mansion. "There are some special rules you need to understand," Mrs. said as they walked through marble hallways lined with expensive artwork. "Mr. Harrison has 2 children, Emma and James. They're 8 and 10 years old, and they're both blind. They were born with a rare genetic condition called congenital amaurosis. The family has tried everything possible to help them, but so far, nothing has worked." Nodded, absorbing this information. She had raised 3 children of her own and had always been good with kids, but she had never worked with children who had visual impairments. "The children have their own wing of the house," Mrs. continued. "They have special tutors who come every day, and there's a full-time nurse named Sarah who helps take care of them. Mr. Harrison is very protective of the children, especially since his wife died in a car accident 3 years ago. He doesn't like the staff to interact with them unless it's absolutely necessary." As they reached the second floor, could hear voices coming from down the hallway. A woman was speaking in a patient but firm tone, and a young boy was responding with obvious frustration. "I don't want to do this anymore," the boy was saying. "What's the point? I can't see anything anyway." "James, we've talked about this," the woman replied. "These exercises will help you navigate better. Your father wants you to learn these skills." "My father wants me to be normal, but I'm not normal," James said, his voice getting louder. "I'll never be normal, and pretending won't change anything." Mrs. shook her head sadly. "That's James," she whispered too. "He's been having a hard time lately. His sister Emma is more cooperative, but James has become very angry. He doesn't want to do his lessons, and he's been having terrible tantrums. Mr. Harrison is at his wit's end." They continued down the hallway and noticed that the house had been specially modified for the children. There were rails along the walls at child height, textured strips on the floor to help with navigation, and braille labels on doors and furniture. Despite all these accommodations, there was something deeply sad about the atmosphere in this part of the house. "Mr. Harrison spends millions of dollars every year trying to find treatments for the children," Mrs. explained, as they entered one of the bedrooms would be responsible for cleaning. "He's taken them to specialists all over the world. They've been to clinics in Switzerland, Germany, Japan, and Israel. He's funded research studies and even started his own foundation to find a cure for their condition." Began organizing her cleaning supplies while Mrs. talked. She was a methodical worker who took pride in doing things thoroughly and correctly. "The children have had experimental treatments, gene therapy trials, and surgeries that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars each," Mrs. continued. "But nothing has helped. The doctors keep saying that maybe someday there will be a breakthrough, but for now, the children's blindness is permanent." As they talked, heard footsteps in the hallway, followed by a man's voice speaking quietly to someone. Mrs. immediately stopped talking and straightened up. "That's Mr. Harrison," she whispered. "He's probably checking on the children before he leaves for work." Richard Harrison appeared in the doorway a moment later. He was a tall man in his early 40s, with graying hair and tired eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. He wore an expensive suit, but his face showed the strain of carrying burdens that money couldn't solve. "Mrs.," he said with a nod, then looked at, "You must be the new housekeeper, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," replied. "I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Harrison." Richard studied her for a moment. Was a 53-year-old African-American woman with kind eyes and a calm presence that people noticed immediately. She had worked her way through community college while raising her children as a single mother, and she carried herself with quiet dignity. Mrs. has explained the situation with my children, Richard asked. Yes, sir. I understand they have special needs, and I'll be very respectful of that. Richard nodded but seemed distant, as if his mind was occupied with weightier matters. The children are going through a difficult period right now, he said. James especially has been struggling with anger issues. Their nurse and tutors are trained professionals, so please don't feel like you need to interact with them beyond basic politeness if you encounter them in the hallways. Of course, sir, replied. Richard left for work and began her duties. The Harrison mansion was immaculate, with rooms that looked like they belonged in a luxury hotel. But as she worked, couldn't stop thinking about what she had heard earlier. The frustration and sadness in that young boy's voice had touched something deep in her heart. Over the next few days, settled into her routine. She arrived early each morning and worked quietly, cleaning and organizing the family's living spaces. She often heard the children with their tutors, working on mobility training, braille reading, and other skills that were supposed to help them navigate the world without sight. Emma, the 8-year-old girl, seemed to cooperate with her lessons, though could hear the sadness in her voice even when she was trying to be good. James, however, was becoming increasingly rebellious. He frequently refused to participate in his lessons, and could hear him arguing with his tutors almost every day. I don't want to learn braille, she heard him say one morning. I don't want to learn to use a cane, I just want to see like other kids. His heart broke a little more each time she heard these outbursts. She had raised children, and she recognized the sound of a child who was not just angry, but deeply hurt and confused about why life had to be so difficult. On her 5th day of work was cleaning near the children's playroom when she heard a loud crash, followed by crying. Without thinking, she dropped her cleaning supplies and hurried toward the sound. She found James sitting on the floor surrounded by scattered toys and books. He had apparently knocked over a bookshelf in frustration, and he was crying with the kind of deep sobs that come from a child who has reached the end of his rope. The nurse, Sarah, was not in the room, and Emma was sitting quietly in a chair nearby, looking small and frightened by her brother's outburst. Hesitated for just a moment, remembering Mr. Harrison's instructions about not interacting with the children. But her maternal instincts were stronger than her fear of breaking rules. She knelt down beside James, careful not to startle him. Hey there, she said gently. Are you hurt? Did you get cut by anything when the shelf fell over? James stopped crying and turned his head toward her voice, confusion replacing some of his anger. Who are you? He asked. I work here, helping keep the house clean. I heard a crash and wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm not hurt, James said quietly, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. I just got mad and pushed the bookshelf. I didn't mean for it to fall over like that. Looked around at the scattered items. Well, these things happen when we're feeling frustrated, she said matter-of-factly. How about we clean this up together? I bet if we work as a team, we can have everything back in place in no time. But I can't see where anything goes, James said, his voice starting to get angry again. I can't do anything right because I can't see. Was quiet for a moment, thinking carefully about what to say next. She had always believed that children needed honest, straightforward communication, even about difficult topics. You know what? She said finally. You're right that you can't see with your eyes. That's a real challenge, and it's okay to be angry about it sometimes. But I've been watching you and your sister this week, and I can tell you're both smart kids who can learn to do a lot of things. Maybe just in different ways than other children. James tilted his head, listening to her voice. Everyone keeps telling me that, he said. They keep saying I can do anything if I just try hard enough, but it's not true. There are lots of things I can't do. You're absolutely right, said, surprising him. There are some things you won't be able to do the same way other kids do them, and anyone who tells you different isn't being honest with you. Emma had gotten up from her chair and was listening to the conversation with interest. But here's what I think, continued. I think you might be able to do some things better than other kids, and you might be able to do some things in ways that are completely different but just as good. The trick is figuring out what those things are. James was quiet, considering this. It was the first time in months that an adult had acknowledged his frustration instead of just trying to talk him out of it. Can you help me understand something? Asked. What's the thing you miss most about not being able to see? What makes you the most angry? James thought for a long moment. I used to remember what my mom looked like, he said finally, his voice very small. But I'm starting to forget her face, and I can't see what Emma looks like now. She's probably grown up a lot, but I'll never know. Felt tears sting her own eyes, but she kept her voice steady. That sounds really hard, she said. Losing those visual memories of people you love would make anyone sad and angry. They sat together in the quiet room for a few minutes, and then had an idea. James, can I ask you to try something with me? It might seem a little strange, but I think it could be interesting. What kind of thing? James asked cautiously. Well, you said you can't see what Emma looks like now, but what if I told you there might be other ways to know a person's face? Ways that don't use your eyes. James looked skeptical, but Emma moved closer, clearly curious about what was suggesting. Gently took James's hand. Would it be okay if I showed you something? I promise it won't hurt and you can stop any time you want. James nodded slowly, guided his hand to her own face, placing his small fingers on her cheek. This is what my face feels like, she said softly. Can you tell that I'm smiling? James's expression changed as his fingers explored the curve of smile. You are smiling, he said with wonder. I can feel it. Now feel here, said, guiding his hand to the corner of her eye. I have little crinkles here because I smile a lot, and here these are my cheekbones. Everyone's face has a different shape. For the first time since had met him, James looked genuinely interested in something. Emma, he said, turning toward his sister, can I feel your face? Emma nodded, then remembered that James couldn't see her nodding. Yes, she said, moving closer to her brother. With guidance, James carefully explored his sister's face with his fingertips. He traced the shape of her nose, her eyebrows, and her smile. You have a different kind of smile than, he told Emma. Yours is smaller, but it's nice. Emma giggled, which made James smile too. Watched this interaction with growing excitement. She was beginning to understand something important about these children that perhaps the expensive specialists and professional tutors had missed. James, she said, what if I told you that you just learned something about your sister that most people with perfect eyesight never learn about their own family members? What do you mean? James asked. How many people do you think really know what their sister's smile feels like? How many people know the exact shape of their mother's face well enough to recognize it just by touch? James was quiet, thinking about this. You're learning to know people in a way that's deeper than just looking at them, continued. That's not something to be sad about, that's something pretty special. For the first time in months, James Harrison smiled a real smile, and watching him, Emma began to smile too. Knew she had probably overstepped her boundaries by spending so much time with the children, but she couldn't bring herself to regret it. As she helped them clean up the scattered books and toys, she found herself thinking about all the ways these bright, sensitive children might be able to experience the world if someone just took the time to show them. She also found herself thinking about Richard Harrison, spending millions of dollars searching for a cure while his children struggled with basic emotional needs that money couldn't address. Didn't know if she would be allowed to continue working with the children, but she hoped she would get another chance. Because for the first time since she had arrived at the mansion, she had seen James and Emma look genuinely happy, and she was beginning to believe that there might be ways to help them that had nothing to do with expensive medical treatments or high-tech solutions. As she finished cleaning up the playroom, heard Mr. Harrison's voice in the hallway. He had come home early from work, and she could hear him talking to Sarah, the nurse, who had apparently returned to find the children laughing with the housekeeper. Richard Harrison stood in the doorway of the playroom, watching something he hadn't seen in over a year. His son James was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, carefully examining a small wooden puzzle with his fingers, while Emma sat beside him offering gentle suggestions. Both children were calm, focused, and genuinely engaged with what they were doing. Was kneeling nearby, quietly organizing the toys that had been scattered earlier. But Richard could see that she was also watching the children with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what she was observing. Sarah told me there was an incident earlier, Richard said, his voice carefully neutral. She said James knocked over the bookshelf. Stood up slowly, meeting Richard's eyes with calm directness. Yes, sir, James was having a difficult moment, but we got everything cleaned up and nobody was hurt. Richard looked around the room, which was now perfectly organized. He had expected to find his son in the middle of one of his usual tantrums, but instead he found both children peacefully playing together in a way they hadn't done in months. James, Richard said, addressing his son, "Are you all right?" James looked up toward his father's voice. "I'm okay, Dad. Taught me something really cool about feeling shapes and textures. Did you know that Emma's ears are a totally different shape than mine?" Richard blinked in surprise. James hadn't spoken to him with this kind of enthusiasm about anything in a very long time. "Showed us how to explore things with our hands in a different way," Emma added. "It's like a game, but it helps us understand things better." Richard looked at with new interest. "May I speak with you privately?" he asked. Nodded and followed Richard out into the hallway, leaving the children with their puzzle. "I want you to know that I appreciate what you did today," Richard said once they were alone. "James hasn't been that calm or happy in months, but I also need to understand what happened here. The children have very specific educational and therapeutic programs designed by specialists. I can't have staff members disrupting their schedules or confusing them with different approaches." Nodded respectfully. "I understand your concern, Mr. Harrison. I don't have any formal training with visually impaired children, but I do have experience raising kids, and sometimes children just need someone to listen to what they're really saying." "What do you mean?" Richard asked. Chose her words carefully. James wasn't just having a tantrum about his lessons today. He was grieving. He told me he's starting to forget what his mother's face looked like, and he's sad that he can't see how Emma is growing up. Those are deep emotional needs that might need to be addressed before he can focus on learning practical skills. Richard was quiet for a long moment. This was not a conversation he had been expecting to have with his housekeeper, but observations hit close to home. He had been so focused on finding medical solutions and providing the best educational resources that he hadn't really considered what his children might be feeling emotionally about their situation. "The specialists we work with are the best in their field," Richard said finally. "They have advanced degrees and years of experience." "I'm sure they do," replied. "And I'm not suggesting that what they're doing isn't important, but maybe the children also need someone who can help them process their feelings about being different. Someone who can show them ways to feel proud of their abilities instead of just frustrated by their limitations." Richard studied's face. There was something about her calm confidence that made him want to listen, even though everything she was saying challenged his approach to helping his children. "What exactly did you do with them today?" he asked. Explained how she had taught James to explore faces and objects through touch, and how this had led to the children connecting with each other in a new way. "The thing is," said, "James and Emma are already learning all the practical skills they need from their tutors, braille, mobility, navigation. But they're not learning to feel good about themselves. They're not learning that being blind doesn't make them broken or less valuable than other children." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. "Of course they're valuable," he said. "They're my children. I love them more than anything." "I know you do," said gently. "But love isn't always enough to help children believe in themselves. Sometimes they need to discover their own strengths through experience." That evening, Richard found himself thinking about words as he sat in his study, reviewing reports about the latest experimental treatment his research foundation was funding. He had spent 3 years and tens of millions of dollars searching for ways to restore his children's vision, but he hadn't spent much time thinking about how to help them thrive with the vision they had. The next morning, Richard made an unusual decision. Instead of leaving for work immediately after breakfast, he asked if she would be willing to spend some time with the children while he observed. "I want to understand what you're seeing that maybe the rest of us are missing," he told her. Agreed, and they went to find James and Emma in their study room, where they were supposed to be working on braille reading with their tutor, Mr. When they arrived, Mr. was clearly frustrated. James was refusing to participate in the lesson, and Emma was trying to mediate between her brother and the tutor. "James, you need to practice reading these words," Mr. was saying. "Your father pays me to help you learn these skills, and you're not cooperating." "I don't care what my father pays you," James replied angrily. "These stupid dots don't make any sense, and I hate feeling them with my fingers." Richard started to step forward to correct his son's disrespectful behavior, but gently touched his arm, asking him to wait and watch. "Mister," said, approaching the tutor, "would it be all right if I tried something different with James for a few minutes?" Mister looked uncertain, but Richard nodded his permission. Sat down next to James, who was slouched in his chair with his arms crossed defiantly. "James," she said, can I ask you a question about these braille dots that you hate so much? What? James said sullenly. When you touch them, what do they feel like to you? Don't think about what they're supposed to mean. Just tell me what the texture feels like. James reluctantly reached out and touched the braille page. They feel like little bumps, he said. Sometimes they're in groups, sometimes they're by themselves. Okay, said. Now, what if I told you that these little bumps are actually a secret code? And what if I told you that people who can read this secret code can learn things that people who only use their eyes might never discover? James looked skeptical but interested despite himself. Pulled out her phone and showed Richard something she had looked up the night before. James, did you know that some of the most famous writers in history were blind, and that some of the greatest musicians and scientists were people who used Braille? Like who? Emma asked, moving closer to listen. Well, there was a man named Louis Braille who actually invented this whole system when he was just 15 years old because he wanted blind people to be able to read and write, said. And there was Helen, who was both blind and deaf, but she learned to read Braille and became a famous author and speaker. There's also a musician named Wonder who's been blind since birth, and he's written some of the most beautiful songs ever recorded. James was listening now, his defensive posture relaxing slightly. The thing about Braille, continued, is that it's not just a substitute for regular reading. People who read Braille often develop incredibly sensitive fingertips that can detect things that sighted people miss completely. It's like having a superpower. A superpower? James said doubtfully. Nodded. Think about it. How many people do you think could identify different types of fabric just by touching them? Or tell the difference between various coins without looking at them? Or read words in complete darkness? She reached into her purse and pulled out several different coins. James, I bet that after you practice with these Braille dots for a while, you'll be able to tell me what each of these coins is just by feeling them. Most people who use their eyes couldn't do that. James tentatively reached for the coins and began exploring them with his fingertips. This one is bigger and thicker, he said, holding a quarter. This one is smaller and has ridges around the edge, he said, picking up a dime. See, said, your fingers are already more sensitive than most people's. The Braille practice will make them even better. For the first time ever, James seemed genuinely interested in the Braille lesson. Mr., who had been watching this interaction with amazement, adjusted his approach and began incorporating suggestions about making the learning feel like developing special abilities rather than compensating for a disability. Richard watched this transformation with growing awareness that something fundamental had been missing from his approach to helping his children. All the expensive treatments and specialized programs in the world couldn't replace the simple but powerful shift in perspective that was offering. Over the following weeks, Richard found himself paying more attention to the emotional aspects of his children's development. He began spending more time at home, observing how interacted with James and Emma and learning from her approach. Never positioned herself as a replacement for the children's professional teachers and therapists. Instead, she found ways to complement their work by helping the children develop confidence and pride in their abilities. She taught them cooking skills, showing them how their heightened senses of smell and touch could make them exceptional in the kitchen. She helped them explore music, demonstrating how blind musicians often develop superior rhythm and pitch recognition. She even worked with them on storytelling, showing them how people who can't rely on visual descriptions often become masterful at creating rich, detailed narratives. Most importantly, help the children understand that their blindness was just one aspect of who they were, not the defining characteristic of their entire identity. You know what I've noticed about you two? Told them one afternoon as they worked together in the garden, feeling different types of leaves and flowers. You notice things that other kids miss. You hear conversations from farther away. You remember voices better than most people. You can tell when someone is happy or sad just by listening to how they speak. These are real skills that make you special. Richard found himself learning alongside his children. He began to see their blindness not as a tragedy to be cured, but as a different way of experiencing the world that could be just as rich and meaningful as sighted experience. One evening, as he was putting the children to bed, James said something that stopped Richard in his tracks. Dad, James said, I still wish I could see sometimes, but I'm not angry about it anymore. Help me understand that I can do lots of important things even without my eyes. Emma nodded in agreement. "And we can still remember Mom," she said. "Taught us that we can remember how her voice sounded and how her hugs felt. Those memories are just as good as the ones from seeing." Richard felt tears in his eyes as he kissed his children goodnight. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt hope about their future that wasn't dependent on medical breakthroughs or technological solutions. But Richard also knew that this informal approach, while wonderful, needed to be integrated with proper professional support to give his children the best possible foundation for their lives. The next morning, he made a decision that would change everything for his family. He called Dr. Susan Martinez, one of the leading experts in childhood development for visually impaired children, and asked her to come to his home to meet and observe what she had been doing with James and Emma. Richard knew he was taking a risk. Professional educators didn't always appreciate input from untrained individuals, no matter how well-intentioned. But he had seen the transformation in his children, and he believed that insights deserved serious consideration. Dr. Susan Martinez arrived at the Harrison mansion with 2 decades of experience working with blind children and a healthy skepticism about untrained individuals who thought they could help where professionals had struggled. She had seen many well-meaning people inadvertently set back children's progress with misguided approaches, and she expected to find something similar at the Harrison home. Richard met Dr. Martinez at the front door and led her to his study, where he explained the situation as objectively as possible. "I want to be clear," Richard said. "I'm not looking to replace any of the professional support my children receive, but I've witnessed changes in James and Emma over the past month that I haven't seen in the 3 years since they lost their mother. I think has discovered something important, and I want your professional opinion about whether her approach has merit." Dr. Martinez nodded. She appreciated Richard's directness and his obvious concern for his children's welfare. "Tell me specifically what changes you've observed," she said. "James has stopped having daily tantrums," Richard replied. "He's participating in his lessons again, and he's started expressing interest in learning new skills. Emma has become more confident and outgoing. Both children seem happier and more engaged with life in general." "And what exactly has this housekeeper been doing with them?" Richard described his methods as best he could, including the focus on helping the children feel proud of their enhanced sensory abilities, and teaching them to see their blindness as a difference rather than a disability. "I'd like to observe her interactions with the children," Dr. Martinez said, "but I also want to interview her privately first to understand her background and approach." Richard arranged for Dr. Martinez to meet with that afternoon while the children were with their regular tutors. Was nervous about the meeting, knowing that her job and her relationship with the children might depend on this professional's assessment. Dr. Martinez began the interview with standard questions about background and experience. As talked about raising her own children and her years of domestic work, Dr. Martinez began to form an impression of someone who was intelligent, observant, and genuinely caring, but who lacked formal training in child development or disability services. "Tell me about your approach with James and Emma," Dr. Martinez said. "What made you think you could help them when they have access to trained specialists?" Thought carefully before answering. "I didn't think I could replace their specialists," she said, "but I noticed that they were learning skills without learning to feel good about themselves. It seemed to me that they needed someone to help them discover their strengths, not just work around their weaknesses." Dr. Martinez was intrigued by this distinction. "Can you give me a specific example?" Described the first day when she had taught James to explore faces through touch, and how this had led to him connecting with his sister in a new way. "The thing that struck me," said, "was that all the adults in James's life were focused on teaching him to do things in spite of being blind. But no one was helping him understand that being blind might actually give him some advantages that other children don't have." Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her skepticism beginning to shift toward genuine interest. "What kind of advantages?" "Well, James has incredible hearing," said. "He can identify people by their footsteps from 3 rooms away. He notices changes in people's voices that tell him about their moods. He remembers conversations word for word because he's not distracted by visual input. But nobody had ever told him that these were special abilities. They had only told him about all the things he couldn't do." Dr. Martinez made notes as talked, recognizing concepts, that aligned with current research in positive psychology and strengths-based approaches to disability. Have you read about these approaches in any professional literature? Dr. Martinez asked. No, admitted. I don't have any professional training. This is just what made sense to me as someone who's raised children. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment, processing what she was hearing. In her experience, parents and caregivers often developed intuitive insights about children that complemented professional training in valuable ways, but seemed to have stumbled onto approaches that were remarkably sophisticated without any formal guidance. I'd like to observe you working with the children, Dr. Martinez said. Would you be comfortable with that? Agreed, and they arranged to spend the next morning together with James and Emma. When Dr. Martinez observed interactions with the children the following day, she witnessed something that challenged many of her assumptions about therapeutic approaches to childhood blindness. Was helping the children prepare a simple lunch in the kitchen, but the activity had been structured as an exploration of their sensory abilities rather than just a practical life skills lesson. James, can you tell me what I'm cooking just by the sound? Asked as she heated oil in a pan. James tilted his head, listening carefully. It's oil getting hot, he said, and it's almost ready because the sound is changing. Exactly right, said. Now, Emma, can you identify this spice just by smelling it? Emma leaned over the spice jar that held open. That's cinnamon, she said confidently. How did you know so quickly? Asked. Because cinnamon smells warm and sweet, but not like sugar, Emma explained. It has its own special smell that's different from everything else. Dr. Martinez watched as continued this process, turning every aspect of the cooking lesson into an opportunity for the children to recognize and celebrate their heightened sensory abilities. But what impressed Dr. Martinez most was how handled moments when the children struggled or became frustrated. When James accidentally knocked over a measuring cup, instead of simply helping him clean it up, used the incident as a learning opportunity. James, this happens to everyone when they're learning to cook, she said calmly. But I bet you noticed that cup falling before it hit the ground, didn't you? James paused, thinking. Yes, I heard it sliding across the counter. That's because your hearing is so sharp that you can track moving objects by sound, explained. Most people wouldn't have noticed until it actually fell. Your ears gave you advance warning. Dr. Martinez realized that was doing something that required considerable skill. She was reframing potential frustrations as evidence of the children's abilities rather than their limitations. After observing several more interactions, Dr. Martinez asked to speak with privately again. I need to ask you something, Dr. Martinez said. Have you ever considered that you have natural talent for this kind of work? Look surprised. What do you mean? What you're doing with these children represents some of the most current thinking in pediatric disability services, Dr. Martinez explained. The focus on strengths rather than deficits, the integration of emotional support with practical skills, the emphasis on building positive identity around difference rather than trying to minimize difference. These are approaches that professionals spend years learning to implement effectively. Was quiet, absorbing this information. I'm going to make a recommendation to Mr. Harrison, Dr. Martinez continued. But first, I want to ask if you would be interested in receiving some professional training that would build on your natural abilities. What kind of training? Asked. There are certification programs for vision rehabilitation specialists, Dr. Martinez explained. With your intuitive understanding of these children's needs and some formal education about visual impairment, you could become qualified to provide professional support services. Was stunned. She had never imagined that her work with James and Emma could lead to a career change, but the idea excited her in a way she hadn't expected. Dr. Martinez met with Richard Harrison that afternoon to deliver her assessment. Your children have made remarkable progress, she told him. This approach has been not only helpful but actually therapeutic in ways that align with the best current practices in the field. Richard felt a mixture of relief and vindication. So you think she should continue working with them? I think she should continue working with them, but I also think you have an opportunity to do something much more significant, Dr. Martinez said. Has demonstrated exceptional natural ability for this work. With proper training, she could become a certified rehabilitation specialist who could help many other children like James and Emma. Dr. Martinez explained her recommendation. Richard should sponsor professional training while she continued working with his children, and eventually could become the director of a new program that would combine traditional vision rehabilitation services with the emotional and psychological support approaches she had developed. "You've been spending millions of dollars trying to cure your children's blindness," Dr. Martinez said. "But what has shown is that there might be ways to help them thrive with their blindness that are just as valuable as a medical cure." Richard was intrigued by this possibility, but he wanted to discuss it before making any decisions. When Richard presented the opportunity to, she was initially overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "I appreciate this more than I can express, but I need to understand what this would mean for James and Emma. They're the ones I care about most." "That's exactly why I think this could work," Richard replied. "You would be able to continue working with them while you train, and eventually you could help develop programs that would benefit other children like them." Thought about her own children, now grown and starting their own families. She thought about the satisfaction she had felt watching James and Emma discover their capabilities. She thought about all the other children who might be struggling with the same issues of identity and self-worth that she had helped the Harrison children address. "If I did this," said finally, "I would want to make sure that other families who don't have your resources could benefit too. Not every blind child has access to expensive specialists and private tutors." Richard nodded. "That's exactly what I was hoping you would say. I want to start a foundation that provides these services to any family that needs them, regardless of their financial situation." 6 months later, was enrolled in her certification program while continuing to work with James and Emma. The children not only supported her decision, but became enthusiastic advocates for her studies, often helping her practice techniques and approaches she was learning in her courses. James, who had once been angry and resistant to learning, became fascinated by the technology and methods used in vision rehabilitation. Emma discovered a talent for music and began learning to play piano, developing the exceptional auditory skills that had helped her recognize. A year after Dr. Martinez's initial visit, Richard Harrison announced the establishment of the Harrison Foundation for Childhood Vision Rehabilitation, with as its founding director. The foundation's mission was to provide comprehensive support services that addressed both the practical and emotional needs of visually impaired children and their families. The foundation's approach, based on its original insights about helping children develop positive identities around their differences, began attracting attention from professionals around the country. Other vision rehabilitation programs started incorporating similar methods and was invited to speak at conferences about her work. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came 2 years later, when James Harrison, now 12 years old, stood before an audience of parents and professionals at a national conference and described his experience. "When I first went blind," James said, "everyone told me I could still do anything I wanted to do, but nobody told me that there might be some things I could do better than other kids because I was blind." Was the first person who helped me understand that being different wasn't the same thing as being broken. In the audience, Richard Harrison watched his son speak with confidence and pride about his experiences, and he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this point. He had spent millions of dollars and traveled around the world seeking a cure for his children's blindness, but the healing they had found had come from a housekeeper who had offered them something that no medical treatment could provide: the understanding that they were whole and valuable exactly as they were. Now doctor, certified vision rehabilitation therapist, and director of the Harrison Foundation, watched James speak and thought about the morning she had first heard him crying in frustration over scattered toys and books. She thought about Emma, now an accomplished young pianist who regularly performed at foundation fundraising events. She thought about the dozens of other children and families who had benefited from the programs they had developed together. Most of all, she thought about the simple truth that had guided all of her work. Sometimes the most profound healing comes not from trying to fix what seems broken, but from helping people discover the unique strengths and capabilities they already possess. The Harrison family's story became a testament to the power of seeing beyond disability to possibility, and to the extraordinary impact that one person's compassion and insight can have when combined with opportunity and resources. Had indeed done the impossible, but not by giving blind children their sight back. Instead, she had given them something equally valuable: the vision to see themselves as capable, valuable, and uniquely gifted individuals who happen to experience the world in a different way. And in helping James and Emma Harrison discover their own worth, had discovered her own calling, and transformed her life in ways she had never imagined possible. Dr. Martinez arrived the following week, prepared to evaluate whether the housekeeper's interactions with the children were helpful or potentially harmful to their development. What she discovered would surprise everyone, including herself. Took a deep breath, preparing to explain what had happened. She didn't know if she was about to be fired, but she knew that what she had just experienced with James and Emma was the beginning of something important.